The International Cello Festival of Canada officially launches today across the city with some of the most prodigious players from across the country and beyond sharing their talents in unique settings and collaborations across Winnipeg. That includes the blend of cello with jazz, rock, and metal, blends that Raphael Weinroth-Browne creates in so much of his own work, collaborating with some of the biggest metal acts in the world and playing to 40,000 people at Hellfest. Raphael Weinroth-Browne joins us in the Classic 107 studios to tell us more. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Our absolute pleasure. First of all, I got to ask, when you're billed at something like the International Cello Festival of Canada, how does that compare to Hellfest?
I mean, it's a different vibe, but it's a real honor to be part of it. You know, as a cellist, it's, of course, super special to perform at a cello festival and to be part of such an incredible lineup of artists. So it's a different atmosphere, but it means a lot to me to be in this lineup and to be able to share a lot of my own original music.
Yeah.
Every opportunity is welcome. And of course, I bring my own energy to every stage, regardless of what the context is.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the moment when you realized that this blend was your artistic path. Can you pick out that moment where maybe you realized that this is the avenue that I can make my own way with this instrument?
I don't think it was a specific instant, but I think that it was an instinct that I always had, actually, that I always wanted to do something a little bit different. And I have my own artistic sensibility, and I think that metal music figures very prominently in that. I think it's just the energy of metal, the spirit of that music, regardless of how it's being presented, just resonates with me as a person and as a creator. So I think even from a very young age, listening to that music and trying to figure out how to play it, I always had a sense that it would be part of my musical DNA and that I would want to express ideas in that particular idiom or with that kind of demeanor, that sort of affect. And it just so happened that the cello became my vehicle for expression. And so I've sort of funneled all of my musical influences and preferences into that.
So with metal, which is a very influential genre, you don't have to look far to see that the metal fans are the most dedicated fans of music, arguably, throughout the musical spectrum. As you were becoming more acquainted with metal as a genre in your formative years, how did that influence the way that you even developed your cello technique in a way that if you think about your life without metal music, how do you think your sound might have been different or your approach to the instrument might have been different?
That's a really great question. I think that my approach to cello playing was inexorably affected by metal. And I would say that as soon as I was able to improvise and kind of come up with my own ideas, I was trying to figure out riffs and I was trying to write my own riffs, and I was trying to emulate the sounds that I was hearing from the bands that I listened to, and definitely, discovering Apocalyptica, for instance, and hearing them do their Metallica renditions and then their originals. I was always trying to figure out how to create those sounds, and then from there, I kind of developed my own language and my own approach, and that combines elements of Middle Eastern music and modern classical, and it's sort of a very specific blend that I have going on. And I think over time you just kind of settle into your voice, and I think you develop a style through repeated iterations of composing and trying to put things out there, and each work kind of develops on the last, and gradually you just develop a certain quiet confidence in your own voice, and then that's your soul song in a way, and that's what you need to express.
There is quite a dovetail between what we think of as very sort of stereotypical Western classical music with all of its interlocking musical ideas and different elements of the orchestra getting their virtuosic sort of expose in certain pieces, and then between that and metal, which has this similar sort of intricacy. How much in your work, as you sort of introduce people to metal as a concept and as a genre when you're performing in venues like the International Cello Festival of Canada, where I'm going to guess you're not going to run into too many metal fans. How often do you find that how often do you find that you're able to explain the dovetails between these two genres and how your artistry can fit them together?
Typically, I think the music speaks for itself.
Aha.
And I can explain it afterwards, but usually seeing is believing. If someone delivers a performance that sort of synthesizes those elements convincingly, I think that the audience is going to be on board.
Okay.
So I tend to just let the music do the talking, because it's, for me, the metal element, yeah, you're right. There's a parallel in terms of sophistication and instrumental virtuosity and structure. There's a lot of elements that are similar, but I think that there's also just an energy, and there's something that's inherent to the composition rather than the sound that can be transferred over. There's also just this kind of spirit, and it's sort of like this spirit of defiance, I think, in the music that's very powerful. And so I wouldn't even say that I try to get it across. I think it just sort of happens.
Yeah, music speaks for itself. I love that phrase, the spirit of defiance, which will be on display in several performances throughout the festival, starting today when you're showcasing your work in a performance at the Des Hôtels Concert Hall this afternoon, for example, called Two Cellos, Two Worlds, Beyond the Classics, alongside the Austrian cellist composer Matthias Bartholomä. Without giving too much away, because obviously audiences are going to have to come check this out for themselves, what will all of that look like as you go beyond the classics?
Well, you'll see a sort of a dialogue, I think, across the centuries between Matthias, his music, and mine, with the classical composers such as Bach and Beethoven.
Yeah.
And there's a piece of mine on the program called Triumvirate, which is actually based off of the Beethoven cello sonata in G minor. It uses themes from that piece, but it sort of transforms them into something a lot more sort of turbocharged, and it's very intense and virtuosic and fiery. And yeah, it's really cool to be able to revisit those melodies and themes in the context of this piece. So we're going to be doing that, and I'm going to be playing some of my recent solo work from a new album I just released called Lifeblood, which also combines amplified and acoustic cello sounds. So there will be also some sort of extended sounds and techniques beyond, I guess, what you're potentially used to hearing from solo cello.
So we've talked about how metal has influenced your cello playing, but it occurs to me that there's another interesting angle to that, which is the reverse, which is how, as you just described, how music by composers like Beethoven will have influenced your work in the metal universe as well. If I think about the work that you've done since you've joined the band Leprous a number of years ago, performing alongside some of the biggest metal acts in the world like Devin Townsend, how does Beethoven and Bach, these sort of very cornerstone composers for the instrument, how does that influence the work that you then bring into a larger band context? And maybe what then do you share as you are part of that collaborative music making world that maybe if you were a guitarist or a drummer that maybe you wouldn't be able to share in the same way?
That's a good question. There's a few different ways to answer that. I would say that every composer that you perform or study kind of becomes part of your DNA, because that music is in your fingers and it's also in your head. And I know that, for instance, playing solo Bach for me inspires me creatively to improvise and compose. It's not just about performing that music or about exercising the fingers. It's also, it gives you a vocabulary. It gives you sort of a greater range of expression. So I think that those figurations, those patterns, and that approach to looking at music inevitably influences what you do outside of that. So I think that that's all there, but I would, when you come into a new collaborative process with other musicians and you're bringing something completely fresh to the table, you're bringing all of your past influences and experiences. So somehow they all just sort of coalesce into one. And it's difficult to distill one or the other necessarily, but when you get there, sometimes it just appears in the music. For instance, there was a passage in my latest album, Lifeblood, where I was playing this melody that just kind of came out as an improvisation and then became part of the finished record. And I realized after, it sounds kind of concerto-like, actually. It's a bit like Dvorak or something. And, I never thought about that consciously in the moment while writing it. It was just sort of first thought, best thought. But then in retrospect, I went, okay, well, I can kind of see where, like, I can sort of trace it back to something that I may have played or some things that I've heard. And so you just have this vocabulary that develops. It's just like language, and it's communication. And when you communicate with different people, you also take on different forms of expression, and maybe your accent changes and you acquire new words and expressions and idioms and whatnot. So I think that, I just liken musical collaboration to verbal communication, I guess.
What do you think this collaboration that occurs within yourself, within these two sort of worlds that become an indistinguishable one world within your playing, how do you think that this will look for you as you look further down the road in your career? Or maybe another way to put it is, do you even know where this journey is taking you, or are you just along for the ride in that way?
That's such a great question. I don't really know exactly where it's going. I think it's like life. If you knew where your life was going to take you exactly, it would be less exciting. Would it be worth experiencing those years? But at the same time, I think that as I continue to create and release music and have experiences as a performer, I start to become clearer on what my sound is and what I can contribute that's unique to me. And so the more I become in touch with that, the more I sort of try to lean into it. And so I feel that there's a certain way that I express, heaviness in music and, aggression and excitement, but also a certain way that I express virtuosity or improvisation or melodicism. And I try to just understand what it is that's specific to my expression that works for me, and then just to lean harder into it. But at the same time, there's moments where you realize that there's a direction that you've explored a little bit somewhere, and that it would be really cool to kind of do a deeper dive into that. And so every so often, I find myself creating something or playing something that I really like, and I think I don't do enough of this. And so that sort of leads me to potentially just diving much deeper in the future. And it's cool to be able to make a whole project out of something that might have just been a quick venture.
Yeah.
So
it strikes me also that another sort of tie that binds metal and quote unquote classical music together is catharsis. There is one of the things, as we continue to try and talk about the virtues of classical music in a wider sort of cultural landscape, is that there's just nothing like sitting in a concert hall seat and being swept away by the emotions of the music. And certainly when it comes to metal, there is that same there's this release for all of these, what you just referred to as these sort of darker channels to be able to be exercised in the music. Does that ever affect, like when you're thinking about how these two things blend, are you consciously thinking about that sort of catharsis and giving a channel to those kind of darker sensibilities in the music, or does that come more naturally?
It comes very naturally to me, I think, because of the way I am as a person and what matters to me. And I think that performance is always a ritual, particularly a live show is always a kind of ritual. And it's one that involves both the performers and the audience, and that they're actually kind of swept up into one sort of cycle and one journey, and that hopefully they come out different at the end than they were at the beginning. So, yeah, I think that I certainly consider the cathartic nature of having an emotional experience in a show and feeling that somehow you're connecting with a part of yourself that you may have otherwise ignored or neglected in waking life, because you just need to have, I think we need to have moments and specific opportunities to sort of channel that. And in the past, there were songs for everything, right? There were songs for various rites of passage in life, for giving birth and for people dying and so on and so forth. I think that was just so much more a part of human culture. And so I think the concert hall in a way is actually maybe an extension of that, or another opportunity for us to commune in that way, even though it doesn't serve a specific purpose in that sense. It can be whatever you need it to be.
Well, we'll be able to be swept away by that catharsis, regardless of what that need is, throughout the International Cello Festival of Canada, taking place throughout this week at venues across the city. Raphael Weinroth-Browne's journey starts with the citywide cello intervention taking place, I understand, at noon today. And then we have the two cellos, two worlds beyond the classics, which we were talking about. That's at 4 o'clock at the Desatel Concert Hall this afternoon. We have more information up at our website, classic107.com, and the Classic 107 app. It's been such a joy to get to hear about your collaborations within yourself and the blend of genres within your artistry, Raphael. Thank you so much for telling us more about it here on Classic 107 today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.